All right, guys. This is officially 8:05 PST. We will get this started. So tonight we'll be talking about some track specific stuff for Thunderhill East. If you're not the first time coming, join us talk learning this technique from one of our best instructors. We'll be talking through some basic track fundamentals on braking, turning, corner exiting, throttling, and all the corner referencing, find out what to reference to brake, to turn in, and stuff like that, and some of the track specific stuff. And tonight's instructor is Fred back with Edgar Lau. Without further ado, Fred, would you mind starting?
Okay, great. Welcome, everyone. So we're going to talk about what we call skilled driving. We call them high-performance driving schools, but it's really, how do we improve our driving skills? So we're going to cover a lot of ground. I'll try to, give time for questions either during the talk or after. Definitely encourage questions. So we're going to be at Thunderhill Raceway. I've got a map here of the track, and I want to start by talking about what we call situational awareness, which is being aware of what's around you. And primarily that starts with vision. So we'll talk about that and emphasize that throughout the talk. As Johnny said, being smooth with all their inputs and braking, turning, and accelerating. We are going to talk about passing rules for people who are new to this type of endeavor. So we'll talk about how to get the passes done. A little bit on weight transfer. It's a little more advanced, but we're going to touch on that. And then we'll end with another awareness subject, which is safety awareness, which is obviously important not only on the track, but on the road as well. So with our vision, we want to look ahead further than you normally do on the street. And people really aren't trained to look far ahead, but the further ahead you look, the more time you give your mind to process what's coming up, what kind of inputs you want to give, what kind of response you might want to have to things going on in front of you. Situational awareness is being aware of who's beside you, what's beside you, who's behind you. And it takes time to build the confidence to be putting attention on what's aware of you all around. So, if you're not aware of everything in the beginning, that's fine. Just it's something we're going to work on really the whole time you're doing this, anytime you're driving. Another part of situational awareness is all your other senses. So as you go through a corner, the weight changes, it transfers, and part of your body feels some stress. And you can use that to understand what's going on with the car, and any sounds. The tires might be squealing, that's giving you feedback. So kind of anything that's going on can be useful in your driving skills. So to talk a little bit more about vision, we say that the hands follow the eyes. So where you look, when your hands are on the steering wheel, if you look to the right, you're without even thinking about it, you're going to turn to the right a bit. And what I've got here is a diagram of three different cars. And let's start with the red car kind of toward the right, driving along, and there's some kind of hazard. So like a big brick sitting in the road. A person who's not a skilled driver is not looking ahead. They're actually looking almost at the hood of their car. They're probably going to hit the brick. Your average driver is looking further ahead, maybe a few cars or several cars ahead. They're probably going to see the hazard. They might have to kind of panic brake or something to avoid it. A skilled driver, which is where we're going, looking much further down the road, is going to see this hazard and take action really early on. It's like it's not even an issue. So it's just a real simple explanation of the value of looking ahead. Another kind of overarching concept is being smooth in all of your inputs. So whether you're getting on the brakes or releasing the brakes, you want to do that smoothly. When you're steering, you might need to turn the wheel quickly, but you want to initiate that smoothly, end the movement smoothly, and not be jerky in between. Gear changes, there's no reason to mash your gearbox if you've got a manual transmission, so you want to be smooth with those. Getting on the throttle, again, smooth getting on the throttle, and actually smooth getting off the throttle. And you can get into trouble sometimes if you're in a corner, you're going fast, and you suddenly lift off the gas for some reason. The car can do things you might not expect, so we don't want to do that. And again, looking ahead smooths you out because it gives your brain the time to process what's coming up. and makes the response of the vehicle more predictable, which is certainly what you want in being a skilled driver. So I want to start with braking. And I think when you think about even your car, and if you're going to modify it, if you're getting more advanced, the first thing is you want to be able to stop the car. So we think about stopping, and then we think about turning. How does it handle? And in the end, you can think about getting on the gas and going faster. So rather than, say, modifying your engine right away, build up the brakes, improve the suspension, and then as you become a better driver, then add some power. So for braking, we're asking the tires to do a lot of work. Whenever we're driving, we're asking the tires to do work. And it turns out that if you want to slow down as quickly as possible, you want to go in a straight line. So you're not asking the tires to do any turning at all. You're just going to give them a straight line, maximum braking power. Track braking is a bit different than driving on the street. On the street, people tend to brake fairly soft as they're coming up to a stop sign, a little harder when they stop. And that's fine for driving on the street. But braking on the track is more like an emergency braking. If a kid ran out in front of you on a street, you want to be able to get on the brakes hard. And by practicing that on track, you're going to start to understand, well, what happens when you hit the brakes hard? Because when we drive around normally, you don't get on the brakes real hard. Otherwise, someone would run into you. So, but on the track, we want to emphasize over time, kind of hard braking for a short distance. It keeps the brakes from overheating. It's an important point. So the diagram here at the bottom, going from kind of left to right, I've got a little eye looking far ahead. So you want to look way ahead. You're coming into a corner. You're going to have to slow down. You're going to have to hit the brake at some point. There's a flag station all the way over to the right, which we'll talk about flag stations more toward the end of the talk. You want to be aware of any information that's out there. Is there any warning signs, or are you fine? When we brake, we might pick some type of reference point of where do we want to brake. There might be a little tree beside the track, or a crack in the road, or a paint mark. So when you begin to brake, I have these large B's for braking intensity. That's hard braking. As the car slows, you want to come off the brake a bit, because as the car slows more and more and more, you don't need all that brake. So you kind of come off of it, and then you've got a curb kind of in the middle of the diagram here. There's a curb beside the track, and you can use that as a reference point. Maybe when you get to the end of the curb, you're going to start to turn into the corner, which we'll talk about next. But I do kind of want to introduce this idea of reference points, because we don't use those generally when we drive on the street. But it turns out that if you pick points to do certain things, and you do that again and again, it can make you more consistent and make you a better driver on the track. And you can actually pick reference points on the street too, which some people do. So now I want to talk about turning. And this is really where the action is. Anyone can go fast in a straight line. It's maintaining momentum and speed through the turns, which is really the interest and the mark of a skilled driver. So I'm going to introduce a number of terms. I'm going to start at the upper right of the diagram. So thinking of a corner from how do you want to exit the corner? And the goal is, when you come through a corner, you want to be on the pavement. You don't want to be off in the dirt. So when we come out of a corner at the number 1 I have here, we call that the track out point. And here I'm showing a reference. There's a curb. We call it a track out curb. And on most tracks, actually, if you aim kind of toward the end of that curb or the middle of that curb, that tends to be a good place to track out. Now we'll go to the middle of the turn. We've got something called an apex. So if people are not familiar with that, and if you're new to this, you probably aren't, it simply means the closest you get to the inside of the corner. And I should mention that this green line, which is the line a car would take through the corner, is the biggest, most open circle you could take. So by turning the steering wheel the least and taking the biggest circle you can maintain speed and momentum. Or if you were trying to save gas, you'd actually save more gas, because you wouldn't scrub off speed by trying to turn too tightly. So the apex here I've shown kind of in the middle of the corner. There's usually an apex curb. At number 3 is what we would call the turn in. That's where you begin to actually turn into the corner. You're turning the steering wheel. And here I've shown it at the end of a curb, and that's a pretty good reference point in general. And then, of course, the braking point as you're coming into the curve. Not all curves need brakes, but a lot of them do. So it just depends on what type of curb you've got there. So the reason all that is important is to think about, well, what if things don't go the way you planned? Now, if someone is, say, they turn in too early, and as you start to go faster on track, your mind will make you think that you should turn in earlier than you actually need to. And so you want to be patient and turn in at your turn in point that you've identified. So here, the red line shows turning in early at the beginning of the curb instead of the end of the curb. What happens there is you get to the inside of the track or the apex earlier, and the trajectory that you're on is going to take you off the track, which we don't want. So if you find that happening, you come in a corner, oh, I'm coming in early, I've got too much speed, I'm not going to make the corner, turn the wheel straight and get on the brakes, slow down. You might be able to stay on the pavement and keep going, or you might go off in the dirt, but at least you'll slow down. You'll be fine in general. The opposite of that is turning in a little too late. Now, this is a safer way to go. It's a little slower, but it's safer. So you miss your turn in point, you turn in a bit late, you end up apexing a bit late. You don't then need the full track out. The momentum of the car is not going to push you out here toward the top of the track. But that's fine. If you end up in the middle of the track, what it tells you is, okay, I could have turned in a little bit earlier. So you can use the exit of the corner to tell you how you did. You know, if you're aiming toward the beginning of the curb and you're running out of track, turn in too early. If you've got a lot of track left, when you come out, turn in too late, and you can kind of adjust your turn in point and speed so that you can get the desired line that you would like. And I see people are still joining here, so sorry if you've missed some of the information, but the recording will be available on the website, so you can always go back and re-watch it from the beginning. So now I want to talk about the going back to the concept of vision and looking ahead. And this is really key for skilled driving. And the goal is, as soon as you've done one thing, like you're coming into a corner and you hit your brake point, well, you're already braking, so you can look ahead toward the inside, toward, say, the center of the corner or the apex area. As you come to a turn-in point, you can start to look further ahead. And as you're, say, getting to the middle of the corner in the apex, you should be looking ahead to the track out point. So the further ahead we look, again, it smooths you out, it keeps you on the line, it keeps you safe. So you're smooth, safe, and fast. So all of those come out of looking ahead. And here I've got a flag station up to the upper right. And so as you're coming out of the corner, as soon as you have a chance, check the next flag station. And if there's no flags, you're good to go. And if there's a flag of some sort indicating some type of danger or caution, then you can start to react right away and not get caught unawares. So again, looking ahead is the key here. So maybe I'll pause just for a minute and see if anyone has any questions so far. So feel free to speak up if you do. If you want to put questions in the chat, Johnny's going to monitor the chat and he can kind of compile the questions as we go. So I want to give you a real world example here. So this is a satellite view that I got off Google Maps. It's a great way to learn tracks. I do this a lot. And it shows actually two turns. So this is a 180-degree turn at Thunderhill, where you're going to be in a couple weeks. This is turn 14 and turn 15 coming onto the straightaway. And turns onto the straightaway are very important because you carry the speed down the straightaway. So if you are worried about your lap times, or you want to go racing eventually, you want to understand that the better you can do the corner just before the straightaway is really going to give you an advantage. So I know the graphic is pretty busy here, so I'm going to talk people through it. And I want to talk about reference points. So this graph is really about reference points and the line that we want to take, and using reference points to help us, make that line happen the way we want. So at the upper left of the diagram, turns out there's a bridge that you're going to come under. So you're coming down a straightaway, you're going to be on the left-hand side of the track, going to come under a bridge. And that is just kind of a general reference, like, hey, I'm going under the bridge, I'm getting close to the corner. I know I'm going to have to do something. Then if you look, if you're coming down the track and you look to the right or down, I showed an access road and there's a break in the barriers or the tire wall that's beside the track. So that break is easy to see. And that is a very good reference point. It might be a good place to start your braking. Now, depending on your car and your speed, you might brake later than that. You might brake earlier than that. but it's a good general reference. And if you look carefully, you can actually see that there are cracks in the pavement. There's little lines. And so if you're really paying attention, you could say to yourself, well, I want to brake at the third line. And I don't expect the novices to do that, but as you get more experience and more advanced, you can really start to tune your inputs using that type of reference point. So we're continuing along the top of the graph. We get to the first turn in point. You're going to look ahead into the corner and start turning the wheel. And there's a blue and white curb. And I've shown the apex about 60% of the way along the curb, and it's about right. So you can figure out mid-curb. You turn in from the outside of the track, the left-hand side of the track, and you're going to arc in toward the inside, or if you're driving on your right-hand side, you're going to just touch that curb or at least get close to it. And if you don't get close to it, don't worry about it. Just get it the next time. Don't try to get over there if you're not there, because that can cause problems. As you come to the apex, that's where you start to feed in a little bit of power and start tracking out. And this is important to look at this graphic here. There's extra pavement. I've marked it as extra pavement. There's this, it's kind of bumpy, but there's a bunch of extra pavement out there. So if somehow you come through the corner, you're going a little too fast, there's a lot of pavement that you can drive on to not end up going into the dirt. And depending on how fast you are, you might even want to use that for some reason. So as you track out toward this extra pavement, that's the end of turn 14, but it's the beginning of turn 15. So you don't actually ever straighten out. You just keep your wheel turned and you start turning in where I've got it marked as turn into. The yellow dot is the same as the track out for 14. You start turning into turn 15. There's a much smaller curb down at the middle bottom of the graphic marked apex 2. So you want to get close to that curb, maybe touch it. And then as you come onto the straightaway, you just let the arc of the turn continue as you come to the track out curb, and then you straighten the wheel. So that's a lot going on, but it illustrates the points we've already talked about: the looking ahead, the braking. Notice there's a flag station in the upper right. So as you're braking or coming under the bridge, check that flag station, make sure things are good. And then braking, turning, tracking out, and then turning in again, and hitting a second apex, and then tracking out, and then feeding in the power. And so I think that my next slide should be, it's going to be combination turns. So we'll talk about power later. So far we've talked about individual turns by themselves or two left-hand turns combined. But in the real world, you go through what we call combination turns, or an S turn, where you're going from, say, a right-hand turn into a left-hand turn. And I've got a green line showing the line that you would want to be on for the desired result, which is to carry the most speed out of that second turn. It's gonna, imagine that's onto a straightaway. Whatever the last turn is in a sequence of turns. So say there's 5 turns, like say at Sonoma Raceway, it's the last turn that's really the most important. And everything else before that, you're setting up for that last turn. So what we're going to do in a combination turn is, as you see in the top left, turn in a bit later, take a later apex on that first turn so that you can be really far over to the right. And then you can turn in for the second turn and hit a normal apex and a normal track out. That's the desired line. The red dotted line superimposes a single turn line where you turn in at a normal place, you hit an apex kind of in the middle of the curb, but when you track out, you end up right at that apex curb of turn 2, and it's going to make turn 2 a lot tighter, and that's really going to slow you down. So I know it's a lot to take in, but as you kind of go through this, look at the diagrams, do the driving, you'll start to get a feel for the rhythm through these combination corners. It's a lot of fun. Now I can talk about accelerating. So we're coming on the straightaway. We're coming out of the corner. We hit the apex. We're coming on to the straightaway. It's time to get on the gas. Just with all the inputs, you want to be smooth with your acceleration, whether you've got a really high power car or even not. You just, as you get around the apex, is generally the part of the track where you want to start feeding in power gently at first. And as you come through the corner and start to straighten your wheel onto the straightaway, the more straight your steering wheel is, the more power you can put on. So you don't want to get on the gas too early while your steering wheel is really turned a lot, because then you'll get into trouble. So As the steering wheel unwinds, you can feed in more power, and the goal would be, as you become skilled, that once your steering wheel is straight and you're at that track out point, you can be at full throttle or whatever amount of gas throttle you prefer to give. Okay, I think that's it on that. So now want to really talk, get into some track specific knowledge. So here is a track map of Thunderhill East. We're doing what we're calling the bypass configuration, which we'll talk about in more detail. Basically, turn 5, there's 2 different ways to take turn 5, marked here 5E for east, and we're going to be using what's called the bypass. So kind of in the middle left of the diagram, you see turn 14E and 15E, so we already talked about that. That's the big 180-degree turn leading onto the front main straight. I'll kind of talk this through fairly quickly, and the lines can be discussed at the event. Edgar will be able to really talk in a lot more detail about the line through each of these corners. But I've shown here a blue line. As you track out of turn 15, you're going to be on the left-hand side of the track, but you've got a left-hand turn coming up turn 1, and you want to be on the right-hand side of the track for that, so you can take the biggest arc through turn 1. So you're going to cross over on the straightaway from the left-hand side to the right-hand side. It's kind of a fairly, it's a good passing zone because it's a long straight, and we'll talk about the passing. Okay, we've got a raised hand. Edgar, go ahead.
Yeah, so I can talk a little bit more about that one. So if you want to go to the next slide, we can look at the actual line through the bypass. And so here we have the bypass, obviously. So it starts from turn 4. At the apex of turn 4, you're trying to slightly late apex turn 4, but at the same time, you still want to track out all the way to the outside, to the curb. You could run on the curb. You might not have to run on the curb, depending on what kind of car. The most important part is we get the car back over center to the right, to the left side as we come over the hill, because that's going to set us up on so that we can point the car more straight over the crest where it's the most hairiest. It's blind. It's a crest, so the car gets light. You can't really get on the gas power on the power there. So what you want to do is really just, as you come up the hill, you want to just maybe come off the gas pedal completely, or just brush the brakes so that you get the nose down a little bit as you go over the crest, so that you can keep a little bit more of a grip in the front of the car. And then after that, the most important part is that your wheel's fairly straight, and you can just let the car land as hard as it wants to. And as you can see, there's going to be a bump where the bypass meets turn 5. So if you aim for that actual point where both tracks meet, it's going to be really bumpy. So try and gradually move away from that tightest point on your right-hand side for your apex, and you'll find a rather smooth spot. It should be about 2 to 3 feet away from where the 2 tracks meet. And after that, what you want to do is come down the hill and just aim for that white paint, as you can see shown in the slide. That's going to look a little bit like it's a sharp point, and you can really attack that and continue to follow the white line around turn 5A, we can call it, and into turn 6. And yeah, so there you go. That's the line through the bypass. Again, we can talk a little bit more about it when we get to it. It is definitely kind of daunting the first time, because you don't know where the road is. All you have to do is really start from the right-hand side, point the car towards the left, and just trust that the road is going to be there. Okay, yeah, so that's about it. Fred, you want to continue?
Sure, great. Thank you, Edgar. That's really helpful, and kind of what Edgar was talking about when you're coming over the hill, and if you're get on the brake a little bit or lift off the gas, that's called weight transfer, which we'll talk about more. And so you're transferring weight to the front of the car to have more grip on the front, so you'll be able to turn. And so, yeah, this is a pretty interesting turn. And the reason what we're showing it is because it's a blind crest. So you're coming up over this, you don't know where you're going, and it takes a little while to figure it out. So I'm going to go back to our overall track map, talk a little bit more about that. In turn 2, I've shown what would be called a single apex line, starting from the outside and curving in and apexing very, very late. There's another line through there called a double apex line, which Edgar will probably talk about at the event. The other turn that we want to talk about, the other blind crest on this track, is turn 9. So I've got a detailed view of that. But you can go back to this map and notice where I've marked the flag stations. It's really important to get those in your mind. When you get to track, when you take your first few laps out there, there will be yellow flags at each station because we'll be doing warm-up laps and some lead follow for the novices, and you'll be able to get a good sense of where the flag stations are, and it's important to know where those are. So now moving to this other blind turn on the track, it's turn 9. And I've shown here you're coming into it from the lower left. And as you turn in, and there's an access road actually to the right, which is a pretty good reference point. You might turn in where those two roads meet. There's kind of a V. That's going to be a very useful reference point for turn in. It might be a little before that, a little after, depending on your car and your speed and your skills. But as you come through the turn, pretty much at the apex, you're just cresting a hill. You can't really see what's ahead. And it's important to continue turning as you come over the crest so you don't go off the track on the right where there's a blue and white curb. So as you crest the hill, turns out there's a water tank far in the distance. And normally, I personally don't use really distant references that often, but sometimes they're useful. And as we come over the hill, that water tank is actually now hidden by a building, but you can see the top of it. If you look at that as you're cresting the hill and are aiming toward it, you basically know you've turned enough, and now you can start to come back over to the right onto that straightaway towards turn 10. If you find you're looking to the left at that tank, you're probably aiming a little bit too far to the right, and if you just continue going at the speed you're going, you might end up in the dirt, so you might need to brake a little bit or lift off and modify your line accordingly. And certainly we'll talk about this a lot more at the event itself. So now we want to talk about passing rules, and this is for, particularly for novices. But I've got a little bit of information that might be interesting for the intermediate folks in our audience here. So the diagram here shows the green car. Imagine that's you. So imagine that you're going to let someone by. They're coming up behind you. They're faster. You want to let them by. And I've shown at the top of the slide here a blue flag with a yellow diagonal stripe, and that's called it's an advisory flag. It's a check your mirrors flag. We call it the passing flag, but it's check your mirrors. There's someone coming up behind you if they'd like to get by. So the key is that the car being passed is not going to deviate from their normal driving line. So the normal driving line going into this right-hand turn is staying on the left-hand side of the track. You brake, you come up to your turning point, you turn in, you hit the apex, you track out, and that's what you're going to do. It's up to the car passing to be able to go around you offline. And so I've shown the car in orange here, coming up behind, and you will give a point by, and that will be discussed in class. If people can see me in on the screen here, if I want someone to pass me, well, actually, in this here, if I'm going to say pass me on the right, I'm going to point over the roof. I'm going to point over my head, and I'm going to really get my hand out and say, hey, pass me on the right-hand side. So here, I give a point. The passing car goes offline, completes the pass. Now, if the straight is really long, that passing car might have time to get all the way back over to the left and take the normal line into the curb. But I've marked here that the passing car may need to turn from in track. So when you pass someone, you don't want to cut them off. You don't want to just whip back over right in front of them and cause them to be upset or cause any friction. So if it's a later pass and you're already at the corner, there's not really time to get all the way over to the left here. So you just turn in from mid-track. You have to slow down a little bit more, and then you turn in and you hit your normal apex, and there you go. So that is an illustration of telling someone to pass on the right. So the point I wanted to make here is that the kind of a general rule. So this is a useful rule. If I'm coming up to a right-hand turn, let the car pass on the right. And so I'm kind of giving them what you would call the inside line into the turn. I'm pointing them into the turn. And when we look at the same type of pass, but coming into a left-hand turn, cars coming up behind me, I'm going to point to the left, directly out the driver's window to the left, and the car will pass. Maybe it'll be able to pull all the way back to its line, maybe not. Maybe it'll turn in from mid-track, but it will then apex. And so by always pointing the car toward the apex, it's a very safe way to let someone faster through, and then they just have to adjust as they're coming into that apex a little faster, and maybe in the middle track, they've got to adjust and be able to make the turn. I've also showed the flag station because there's generally a flag station for pretty much every turn or every couple turns. And so both when you're passing or being passed, before that happens, you check the flag stations, because if there is a warning or advisory flag, there's some kind of emergency, well, we can't pass under certain flags. And so don't point someone by, or if someone does point you by, but you look ahead, you see a yellow flag, that's a caution flag, don't take the pass because you're coming up to an emergency situation. So always keep your focus ahead, keep your vision ahead, and be aware, that's that situational awareness. So, these are very simple passes, right? Coming into a right-hand turn, point someone by to the right. Coming in a left-hand turn, point someone by to the left. What happens if you have a combination turn? And so there's one of these at Thunderhill, a good one at Sonoma, where let's imagine you're coming out of turn one, you're the green car, you want to let someone by, they're coming up behind you, you see the blue flag, okay, I want to let them by. Normally, you would track out of turn one, move back over to the left to your normal line, and then point them by to the inside of turn two. That's what we just talked about, your standard pass. But if you're thinking about it, as you're coming out of one and starting to track out, if you feel comfortable, you can point someone by on here on the left, give them what we call an early point by, and essentially you're pointing them to the inside of turn one. So while you're tracking out, they can go by you. It's up to them to be offline. And then now that they're by you, you can come back over to your normal line. So you have to use your judgment in this type of situation, because let's say you're coming through here and there's 2 or 3 cars that want to get by, but they're pretty far behind. You might say to yourself, okay, I'm going to get over to the left and point them all by into turn two. Whereas if there's 2 cars right on you coming out of turn one, you might say, okay, I'm going to track out and stay tracked out a little longer to let both cars by. So you've got to use your judgment when you're letting people by. And we also want to make the point that each time you point a car by, there is 1 point per car. And if you're in a group of cars passing a car, wait for that car to give you a point by, because we really want to have that communication and that situational awareness, because we don't want people, making a mistake and potentially even running into each other. Generally, that doesn't happen. And if we all, use the point bys and 1 car per point by, that's going to work out really good. So we're getting toward the end of the presentation, and I know we've covered a lot, but as I said, we've got plenty of time to ask questions and talk. So I want to talk a bit about what we call weight transfer. And that happens when there's some kind of acceleration going on, acceleration or deceleration will make weight transfer, really it's a force momentum transfer. So in the upper left of the diagram here, I've got this motorcycle, got on the brakes really hard, and what's happening is all the weight's going to the front. Typically in most vehicles, when you brake hard, about 70% of the weight of the car goes to the front of the car. Now that can be used to help you navigate a turn. If you're coming into a turn, the car's not turning very well. If you get on the brakes a little harder, you can transfer more weight forward, give the front tires a little more grip, and that's going to help you turn. Then in the upper right, we've got this monster VW bus dragster here showing extreme rear weight transfer, 100% of the weight to the rear tires. And again, that's useful coming out of the corner. The more gas you put on, the more weight transfers to the rear, and the more power you can put down. And I'll probably do a whole presentation on this subject at some point later, but just want to introduce it for folks. In the lower left, we've got side-to-side weight transfer. We've got this old Citroen 2 CV here with a lot of weight transfer going through a corner. All the weight is going to the outside of the corner. That affects how the car handles. and it affects how the car turns and can brake. And then finally, we have diagonal weight transfer in the lower right. And this looks like a combination of probably braking and turning. So you can see the weight is really loading up on that front left tire. That outer tire is really taking all the weight. And that can actually be used for something. If you wanted to turn the other direction, the car will actually pivot on that particular point. So over time, as you drive on track more and you get more familiar of feeling weight transfer and starting to understand it, you can really use that to improve your driving skills and manage the car in emergency situations too. It will really help you to understand this. So a lot deeper subject, but I wanted to introduce it. So now we'll come back to awareness, safety. So we have flags on the track, and that is much like imagine stoplights. In particular, the green, the yellow, and the red flag. The green flag means go. Track is clear, you're good to go. Yellow flag, just like a stoplight, caution, you might need to slow down. Red flag means stop. And those will be covered in a lot of detail in the classroom. So I just kind of want to briefly introduce them and urge people to go online. There's some through like SCCA or NASA or some of the other racing organizations. There's very good descriptions of what these flags are. But the point I want to make is to look at each flag station every time you're going around. So imagine you're driving down a road in a city. There's a bunch of stoplights all the way down. You're always checking those stoplights, right? Is it green? Is it yellow? Is it red? Do I have to stop? Should I get on the gas? You know, is there someone coming in from the side? You're always checking them. On a track, it's exactly the same. Every one of those flag stations is looking ahead. They can see what you can't. They can essentially see your future. And if someone that you can't see has now blown an engine and dropped oil all over the track, you don't want to come flying through a corner and then hit the oil and go off. You want to see that they've got a warning flag out, and then you can slow down, drive through the situation, and be fine. So it's really important to pay attention to the flag stations, and also they help keep your eyes up and looking forward. So this, as I was saying earlier, the sooner you can look at a flag station, and you can pick a certain point for each corner. It's like I'm going to check the flag station as I'm going into the corner, and then as you're coming out, you check it again just to make sure something hasn't happened in the meantime. And what's interesting is in flagging, and that the flaggers are really, they see into the car. They're not just looking at the car. They're looking to see if maybe your tire's going down or if you're dragging a muffler. And then they'll flag you to let you know, hey, you should come in. We got to fix something. If your helmet is not strapped, hopefully everyone's helmet's going to be strapped. We're going to go over that at the event. But if your helmet's not strapped, they'll see that. They're actually looking in the car and checking it out. So you want to pay attention to them. And at the end of the session, once the checkered flag flies and you're coming back in the pit, it's always nice to just give them a wave, say, hey, thank you for your service. So I think that is a lot to cover, and would be happy to take some questions and just have some general discussion. And Edgar or Johnny, if you've got some other points you'd like to make, feel free. And
Yeah, thank you, Fred, for sharing your knowledge. Years of knowledge and racing and coaching. So very great stuff. Anybody have questions? Anything in particular you want to know? Something that you're confused with? Feel free to type it out or say it out loud.
Yeah, and while people are thinking about that, there's a lot of good information out there. People learn in different ways. So some people like to read, and there's a lot of good books. Other people do well, kind of like watching or feeling. So when you go to an event, you can ask if there's an instructor there. You can say, hey, can I ride with you for a session? And that can be very instructive. So there's different ways to learn. I tend to analyze tracks. So I look at satellite views. You can get to a track the day before and maybe walk around the track that evening when the track's closed down, if you get permission. So it's really useful to understand this venue that you're going to and all the nuances of it. You can learn a lot by studying it in different ways.
That's right, Frank. Okay, well, if no one has any questions, we are going to end today's presentation. Thank you everyone for joining us. I hope you learned something and get yourself prepared for the April 28th Thunderhill track event with us. Looking forward to see your face there. I will talk to you later.
All right. Thanks, everyone.